March is National Women's History Month, and my guest this morning is Kim Kaupe. She describes herself as an accidental entrepreneur. So, Kim, first of all, welcome to Jersey Magazine.
Thank you for having me.
And what is an accidental entrepreneur?
To me, an accidental entrepreneur is someone who, like myself, went through high school and maybe college or vocational schools saying to themselves, my big goal in life is to work for XYZ Corporation. In my case, that was working at a big national magazine house. So Time Inc. or Hearst or Condé Nast. That was my big dream as I was growing up. I really wanted to work for one of these big corporations. And just as it turns out, I ultimately did work at one of those corporations, but then a few years later, entrepreneurship just kind of fell in my lap. And so I always love calling myself an accidental entrepreneur because I think we are fed these stories that if you were not having lemonade stands or running a babysitting ring in middle school, that you're not really an entrepreneur. And so I love to use the example of whether it's Ray Kroc from McDonald's who really kind of blew that up in his 50s, that there are lots of times to become an entrepreneur, and being a young one with a lemonade stand isn't always the one that we have to go with.
So, when you were in middle school, what did you do if you didn't run the lemonade stand? Because I'm sure you had something up your sleeve.
I didn't know. I was doing sports and playing with my friends, and there wasn't really any kind of entrepreneurial bone in my body, which I think is important to say, because I think we can all kind of look back, hindsight's 2020, and say, well, I was a babysitter, and I guess that takes some sort of entrepreneurial skill, but like most parents know, babysitters are usually in high demand. So if you are a good one, chances are you will be gainfully employed by those in your neighborhood or around you.
So, how does an accidental entrepreneur go from no clients to, somebody you may have heard of, like a Paul McCartney or an Oprah Winfrey or the New York Mets? How does that happen?
It happens with a lot of luck and a little bit of hard work and a little bit of naivety to just say, like, let's go for it. So really how we started, obviously we did not start out with those big name clients. We started out with much smaller clients, clients that are still popular, but maybe are less well known nationally, and really saying to those clients, hey, we will work for free or at a very reduced cost so that you don't have a lot of skin in the game. You don't have a lot to lose by taking a chance on us. And, getting those first couple projects under our belt. And then it's a really great example of, cut, copy, paste, and going to people and saying, hey, look what we did for XYZ. We can do the same thing for you. And just slowly but surely kind of building that up until you get to bigger and bigger names and clients.
Kim Kaupe is my guest this morning here on Jersey Magazine at 105.5 WDHA. Some of our listeners may know you from Shark Tank. Yeah. And this is an amazing story, and you'll tell it much better than I did. How did you convince them to give you that kind of money?
Well, fun fact, while you may have seen our episode on season 5 of Shark Tank, we went home with a deal for $725,000 with Lori and Robert. But spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the episode, we did not actually go through with that deal. So it is very much like you see on the show, you're meeting for the first time. And the best example I give people is, sometimes you don't marry somebody after a first date. Sometimes after the first date, you have a second date and a third date. And what we realized is, while we love Robert and love Lori, it wasn't necessarily a marriage fit. It was maybe more of a best friend fit. So we've done some work from them since then, just on and off, but we don't actually have a financial fiscal investment from them. So we're better off as best friends instead of business married.
The way you approached the show was very, very interesting, in that you went back and watched how many of those previous episodes to figure out a pattern to the questions.
Hundreds. Yeah, we went back and watched every single episode from the previous 4 seasons. And exactly like you said, Jim, we made a spreadsheet with all the questions that get asked the most often. And then we would put a little tally I can remember sitting there on my couch, like putting a tally next to the questions that they would ask over and over. And then we just took those kind of top 10 questions that they seem to ask most frequently and come up with really strong answers to those.
So from a kid who did not have the lemonade stand, how many companies have you started now?
Oh man, a handful, a handful. Once the entrepreneurial bug bites you, it's hard to shake.
Kim Kaupe, my guest this morning on Jersey Magazine at 105.5 WDHA. I initially had reached out to you a few weeks ago. Back in mid-December, you ran one of your mini workshops, self-evaluation assessment. You mentioned goals a little earlier, and you talk about in this one particular episode that day, goals versus resolutions. Describe what both of those mean to you.
Yeah, for me, resolutions are easy to give up on. We start January 1 sometimes and we say, okay, my resolution is to have a six pack, and then you don't go to the gym for a couple weeks or you go on vacation and then you kind of feel like, well, I'm just going to throw my hands up in the air because, I didn't do it. Maybe I'll try again next year, try for the six pack next year. And for me, goals are more malleable. They're things that you can move and set and reset, and they should be changed, right? So maybe your goal is to one day, I know for me, it's to do like one full push-up, like a proper push-up. So for me, it might be like, okay, let me try to do 5 of them on my knees. And work my way up to that. And then, eventually you kind of just have these smaller goals or baby steps to kind of get you to maybe a larger ultimate goal.
I'm sure you're familiar with a guy named John Gordon. He wrote the book, The Energy Bus. I'm sure you've read that book. John, for the new year, is fond of using one word as your goal or resolution. And I've done this a couple of times, and I've met with varying levels of success. Last year was focus. I think I got to February before that one fell apart. And this year, I decided to use the word finish because I am a terrible procrastinator. And 2, if I start something, well, this needs to be done over here. And well, yeah, I should probably get going on that as well. So it's really been tough for me, but I've gotten into March now so far. And a lot of different things that I did start, I just said, this has to get finished. I've got to get finished. If you were going to pick one word, what might that be for you?
I think for me, it would be the word ignite. I feel like I've really had a reset. I was living in New York City. I'm now settled in Austin, Texas, the last 2 years, as anyone know who's moved a distance. You're kind of getting settled, you're making friends, you're finding your favorite grocery store, you're finding, your favorite workout classes. And now I feel like I've got that base. We've got the kindling for the fire, and now it's time to kind of ignite and come alive and get a second wind in my new home.
And every so often, though, you end up coming back to New York City. You were just there recently.
Yeah, I love coming back to the city. It is home away from home. I still have lots of friends there and colleagues there. So I love going back. I go back probably 2 or 3 times a quarter.
It's an amazing city. I was born there, lived there for a while, and I'm of the opinion that everybody at some point in their life should probably live in New York City, but they should also probably get out before they get jaded.
Yeah. I always say that to me, New York City is like an Oreo. So the best times to live there are early, like your 20s, early 30s, and then maybe get out for the middle part. And then I actually think for retirees, it is a brilliant city to live in. You can walk everywhere, tons of museums, tons to do. So I also think as you get older, it's a great city to revisit.
Going back to goals and resolutions, you were talking about how, obviously January 1st is a big deal, but I like to pick different spots of the year. And we've just come up on pitchers and catchers reporting, spring training starting, and we're coming upon the start of opening day. So there's that, you can kind of hit that reset button. So I don't know if I'm going to hit the reset button on finish or not. I'm a high school baseball coach as well as doing this radio thing. So I'm trying to bring that one word to these 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids. And we'll be starting our season in just a couple of weeks, whether it's, commitment to that pitch that you're about to throw, or finishing an inning, or focusing on the task ahead. You can always hit that reset button, Kim.
You can always finish. And I always say to people, again, break it into smaller pieces. Because sometimes when you have these big lofty goals, it can seem like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to finish that or ever make movements? So, maybe it's setting little intentions that you finish each week or even each day. I'm definitely one of those people that I do it by week. Personally, I say like, okay, I have to get these 3 things done this week. It's not a million. It's usually like under 5, but it really helps me focus and finish things, like you said.
Every Wednesday, or most Wednesdays at 1:00, I have Coffee with Kim. It's a regular series, and I'm having coffee this morning, as a matter of fact. That's a wonderful series, by the way. Tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, it really started in earnest during the pandemic. So I was having these insights before the pandemic that I was having all these wonderful meetings and coffee meetings with these interesting people. And what would happen is I would go to brunch with my friends that weekend, and I would tell them like, you will never believe who I met this week. And like, they had this really interesting thing to say. And what was so funny is my friends were then asking me follow-up questions like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. That woman, Bonnie, what is she? I wonder what she thinks about XYZ. And I would say, that's a good point. I wonder what she does think about that. And so I'd email her, she would email me back. Then I'm emailing the friend I had brunch with, like, here was her answer. And, I just sort of realized like, wait a minute, I shouldn't be the only person with the seat at the table. Other people I would love to join, and they can ask questions in real time. So that's kind of the spark of the idea. And COVID really initiated that in a whole new way, because people were getting used to meeting on Zoom and they were getting used to virtual coffee meetings. So it really just ignited in a way that I am so grateful for. It's my favorite meeting every single week. So I absolutely love it. And it's made so much more rich by all the people that join. I always say it's not the guests necessarily that are offering all the value. It's everybody who's meeting in our virtual coffee shop that's really adding in a lot of value.
I've actually stolen 2 of your guests. Ron Tite has been on with us, and Laura Gassner-Odding has actually been on twice. I'm going to have her on again when her book Wonder Hill comes out in a few weeks. She is wonderful, by the way.
She is such a powerhouse. And again, I'm so happy to hear that, because that's what this is all about. I really have this strong belief that whether it's networking or getting connections or learning from other people, it warms my heart that people that I was able to kind of like introduce you to, you've now run with. And hopefully the same thing's happening again. Someone says, I heard from Jim about Laura, and then they're running with it. So that to me is like the best type of reward.
I think from a musical, if I could make a musical comparison, Mark Rivera, who's the saxophone player with Billy Joel, he's Ringo Starr's musical director. He has a brand new book out called Sidemen. And he talks about in the book, you go on stage, you go to a big place like Madison Square Garden, where Billy plays every month, and you do the sound check, and it's this big cavernous booming building. And they go through the motions, obviously, of getting everything right. But once the audience comes in, the audience starts to absorb the sound, and not just the reaction of the audience to each song, but the audience becomes part of that show in the way that they absorb the sound, the way that they affect the sound. So I think that's much of like what happens with you on these Coffee with Kim segments.
So true. I think it's really the energy and the intention that everybody else is also bringing that makes it so magical.
So I mentioned that I've stolen 2 of your guests. I'm going to steal 2 of your questions that you frequently ask on Coffee with Kim. What homework do you have for us?
If I could give anybody some homework, this will have to do with people who are still like in the working world. It would be to get on LinkedIn. I would say it's one of the most underutilized platforms. I think people think that it's like old and stuffy and only for business, and it's not. It's totally changed. So I would encourage people to dust off that password and jump on the platform. It's a great one. So that would be That would be my answer if I could like narrow it down to one.
And where can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn, but if they are like, no, I don't really want to use LinkedIn, that's okay. I'm over on Instagram. You can find me there. It's quite fun. You start typing in Kim Kardashian. So you start typing in KIMKA, and when you type in the KA, I will be the one that comes up under Kardashian. So I always say you're going to see two Kim K's. One is half naked and one is me. So the one that has more clothes on, that's me. That's
You're not kidding either, because I did a search for you earlier this morning on Instagram, and that's exactly the order in which it came up.
exactly. I'm like, there's going to be a naked Kim K and there's going to be a clothed one. You're going to want to go with the clothed one.
Well, Kim Kaupe, thank you so much for joining us this morning here on Jersey Magazine, and I look forward to our next Coffee with Kim segment.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.